In the late 1970s, Japan faced a pressing issue. Venomous snake bites posed a significant threat, particularly in rural areas. To tackle this danger, officials decided to introduce mongooses, hoping these animals would reduce the snake population and save lives. However, over the next 25 years, the plan backfired, creating a new set of problems that nobody anticipated. Rather than controlling the snakes, the mongooses disrupted the ecosystem, leading to an even bigger environmental challenge. This is the surprising story of how one choice created a new challenge, and the effort it took to make things right. Let's look at how Japan's plan to fight snakes took an unexpected turn. For years, dealing with venomous Habu snake bites was a huge concern in certain parts of Japan. These snakes posed a real threat to people's daily lives. In fact, back in 1980 alone, around 400 people were bitten, and tragically, not everyone survived. While Japan is home to many venomous snakes, the Habu and their relatives, like the eastern pit vipers, are among the most dangerous. They belong to the same family as rattlesnakes and puff adders, with distant cousins like coral snakes and cobras. So it's easy to see the challenge that people in Japan faced. Living near these deadly snakes meant being constantly on edge, as snake bites were a regular and frightening risk. Recently, a striking image has gone viral, capturing nearly 100 rats climbing a mountain. It's pretty wild. No one's quite sure where it happened, but it's definitely got people talking. What do you think is going on? Share your comments below. We would love to hear your perspective. Back then, Habu snake bites posed a serious threat, especially because there was no antidote available for a long time. Even when scientists finally developed one, access was a whole different issue. The antidote was only available in liquid form, which required refrigeration to remain effective. But here's the problem. Many bites happened in remote rural areas without electricity or reliable storage facilities. Setting up power lines in these areas would have been incredibly expensive and taken ages. And trying to make a new form of antidote wasn't exactly feasible either. With these obstacles, getting life-saving treatment to bite victims in time was often nearly impossible. So Japan came up with what seemed like a brilliant workaround. Bring in a natural predator, an animal that could eat the snakes and was immune to their venom. But as with many well-intentioned plans, things didn't go quite as expected. However, don't worry. They eventually managed to regain control, but not without a few surprises along the way. It's likely you figured out which animal we're talking about, the mongoose. Back in 1979, Japan introduced around 30 small Indian mongooses to Amami Oshima Island, hoping they would tackle the growing problem of Habu snakes. As a bonus, they thought these mongooses could help reduce the rat population too. Native to countries like India, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, and Pakistan, mongooses were a completely new presence in Japan's wildlife, and local ecosystems weren't prepared for the impact. Their arrival ended up tipping the delicate balance of Amami Oshima's ecosystem in ways no one had foreseen. By 1993, the mongoose population was climbing rapidly, and Japan's Ministry of the Environment began to take notice. By the year 2000, their numbers had soared to about 10,000, sparking serious concerns. So did this influx of mongooses reduce the Habu snake population? Technically, yes, but not in the way anyone expected. Despite the original plan, the mongooses turned out to be less interested in hunting the venomous Habu snakes and focused instead on easier prey. The result? The snakebite problem wasn't solved, and the local community still had to deal with the very issue the mongoose was meant to address. Initially, the idea of using mongooses to handle the snake problem seemed perfect. These animals are quick, agile, and skilled hunters, qualities that make them great at taking on dangerous snakes like cobras, which are similar to the Habu snakes people were worried about. Plus, mongooses have a unique advantage, special receptors that help them resist cobra venom, allowing them to survive bites that would be lethal to most other animals. With their sharp reflexes and strong pointed teeth, mongooses seemed like they could be the ideal solution to reduce the snake population and protect people from snake bites. However, there was one big catch. Mongooses are active during the day, while Habu snakes are nocturnal, meaning they're rarely out and about at the same time. So even though they could potentially hunt snakes, they weren't meeting them often enough to make a difference. And even when they did cross paths, mongooses weren't especially motivated to go after these tricky, elusive snakes. Hunting snakes is a lot of work, and mongooses have other, easier meal options like mice and rabbits. It's kind of like choosing between an exhausting gourmet dish that fights back and a quick, easy snack. No wonder they usually went for the simpler option. Turns out, even though mongooses had all the skills to be snake hunters, they ended up being completely useless for the job they were brought in to do. Instead, they were incredibly good at one thing: breeding. By 2000, the mongoose population was booming, prompting the Japanese government to step in with a program to control their numbers. Since then, around 32,000 mongooses have been captured. The last known capture happened in April 2018, and since then, there haven't been any new sightings. Experts even declared that the mongoose population on Amami Oshima was fully eradicated, a success the Ministry of the Environment celebrated, though no doubt the mongooses wouldn't have shared in the excitement. But how did Japan manage to get rid of these invasive creatures? It wasn't easy. At first, they tried setting up traps along the roads, but these didn't attract the mongooses very well. It quickly became clear they'd need a more comprehensive approach. Eventually, they turned to specially designed traps, toxic bait, and scent-based attractants to lure the mongooses. They even brought in search dogs and used advanced monitoring techniques. This multi-pronged strategy proved to be exactly what was needed to curb the mongoose numbers. On a graph showing their population, you'd see a steep decline as the number of traps increased. These new traps were specifically designed for mongooses, ensuring that other animals wouldn't accidentally get caught. Thanks to this careful and thorough approach, Japan successfully managed to control and eventually eliminate the mongoose problem. The local community played a huge role in this effort too. Since 2005, teams of mongoose hunters, locals and volunteers have been combing the forests and mountains, putting in countless hours to help trap and capture mongooses. Their dedication has been a big part of the eradication program's success. But it's natural to wonder, was all this effort really necessary? Couldn't they have just let the mongooses be? After all, they weren't native to the island, but was it worth all this work to get rid of them? The answer is a definite yes. Instead of controlling the snake population as planned, the mongooses began preying on the island's native species, like the endangered Amami rabbit and other local animals. Amami Oshima, a subtropical island and UNESCO World Heritage Site, is home to many rare and vulnerable species that needed protection. The mongooses, however, specifically went after the Amami rabbit, which is now endangered. This made getting rid of the mongooses essential for preserving the island's unique ecosystem. These Amami rabbits are often called living fossils, because they're the last remnants of an ancient line of Asian rabbits. Long ago, their ancestors roamed the mainland, but now they survive only on 2 small islands. The arrival of mongooses has severely hurt their chances of survival. The mongooses also targeted Ryukyu rats, pushing them toward extinction as well. In total, about 15 native species have suffered from the introduction of mongooses, which ironically were brought to the island with good intents. The farming community also felt the impact of the mongoose invasion. Mongooses preyed on farm birds, feasted on fruits in the fields, and even spread diseases to livestock. Animals they didn't even eat. In just 2 decades, the habitat for small animals shrank by a staggering 40%. It became painfully clear that bringing mongooses to these small Japanese islands was a mistake. Islands have delicate ecosystems, often home to species that don't have natural defenses against predators. Introducing a new predator is risky anywhere, but it's especially dangerous on islands. And with a mongoose, an animal that will eat practically anything it catches, the damage multiplies fast. The crisis on Amami Oshima underscored why it's so important to think carefully before introducing new species to fragile island environments. It took Japan nearly 25 years to fully eradicate the mongooses and close to 50 years to wrap up the entire project. Some might see removing so many mongooses as extreme, but Japan made the right call to protect its local species. Invasive species can cause serious harm if left unchecked, and once they spread, removing them becomes increasingly difficult, or even impossible. Japan's success on Amami Oshima is impressive, It's one of only 9 places worldwide where mongooses have been completely eradicated, and it's the only case on an island of this size. This experience highlights just how essential it is to act quickly against invasive species to protect native wildlife and keep ecosystems like those on Amami Oshima healthy and thriving. Just to put things into perspective, Habu snakebites have actually become far less of an issue in recent years. By 2020, the number of bites was down to around 60 per year. But this drop wasn't due to the mongooses. It was thanks to people taking better preventative measures and having easier access to antidotes, which has prevented fatalities. In fact, since 1992, there hasn't been a single reported death from a Habu bite. A graph illustrates this progress, with black bars marking cases where antidotes were used, and it's clear that improved medical care and education have made a huge difference. So while mongooses didn't solve the snake problem, community efforts definitely helped reduce snake bites and keep people safe. But the fight against invasive species isn't over yet. Mongooses still inhabit other islands, and Japan is using lessons learned from Amami Oshima to tackle these ongoing challenges. For instance, a team of specialists is preparing to head to northern Okinawa, where mongooses have also been spotted. There's even a real risk that mongooses from Okinawa could find their way back to Amami Oshima, forcing Japan to start its eradication efforts all over again. Mongooses were actually introduced to Okinawa way back in the Meiji era, around 70 years before they arrived in Amami Oshima. 17 mongooses were released back then, and Okinawa's warmer climate and habitat are much more similar to their natural environment, making it easier for them to thrive. This means higher birth and survival rates for mongooses in Okinawa, which adds an extra layer of difficulty for conservation teams trying to protect Japan's native species. Right now, the mongoose population in northern Okinawa is under control, but they're still thriving in the central and southern parts. To help contain them, fences have been installed throughout Okinawa, and so far, they're doing their job. The fences aren't particularly tall, but they're designed with an L shape at the bottom, which prevents the mongooses from digging underneath. Since mongooses generally don't climb over, these fences are an effective barrier. Just like on Amami Oshima, though, the survival of 3 native bird species on Okinawa now relies on keeping the mongoose population in check. If this story about bringing in mongooses to handle pests sounds familiar, that's because it's part of a larger trend called biological control. Using one species to control another, it's a whole field of science, and Japan isn't the only country that's experimented with it. When people decide to try biological control, they usually start with a lot of research. First, they study the pest they want to manage, and then identify its natural predator. After that, they dive even deeper into researching whether introducing this predator might accidentally harm other local species. Only after these thorough studies do they typically go ahead with releasing the predator to tackle the problem. Biological control has been around for a long time and has had its fair share of successes. A well-known example is farmers using predatory insects to protect their fruit trees and gardens. While it can be an effective method, it's crucial to approach it with caution to avoid unintended consequences, as seen with Japan's experience with mongooses. The small Asian mongoose, in fact, has been introduced to places far beyond Japan, including Cuba, Croatia, Jamaica, Haiti, Puerto Rico, the Lesser Antilles, Belize, Honduras, Panama, and more. In many cases, introducing mongooses worked out just fine. But in Hawaii, things took a different turn in the 1800s. Back then, Hawaii's most valuable crop was sugarcane, which was facing serious damage from rats that loved to gnaw on the sweet cane stalks. Plantation owners were desperate for a solution. In 1872, they came across an article about Caribbean sugar producers who had used mongooses to successfully control their rat problem. The plan seemed straightforward. Bring in mongooses from India to eat the rats, and problem solved. So, in the 1880s, Hawaiian planters imported 72 mongooses from Jamaica to the Big Island. Their descendants were later sent to other plantations across the islands, including Maui, Molokai, and Oahu, in hopes of finally putting an end to the rat issue. Even at the time, some locals on the Big Island were skeptical of the mongoose plan. They argued for more research to see how well it had actually worked in the Caribbean before bringing mongooses to Hawaii. Unfortunately, these skeptics were ignored, and soon a major flaw in the plan became obvious. Rats are nocturnal, they're only active at night, while mongooses are active during the day. This meant they barely crossed paths, leaving the rat problem largely unsolved and adding a new invasive species to Hawaii's delicate ecosystem. Rather than solving Hawaii's rat problem, the mongooses started preying on native Hawaiian species, particularly birds and turtles. Their eggs were easy targets, and the situation quickly got worse. What was meant to be a helpful solution ended up creating even more challenges for Hawaii's unique wildlife. Native species were being wiped out, and the damage was becoming severe. Eventually, the government put up barriers to keep mongooses out of protected nature reserves. But by then, it felt like Hawaii had missed its chance to act in time. Today, controlling the mongoose population has become extremely difficult, nearly impossible. These invasive animals have already driven at least 8 native Hawaiian bird species to extinction, many of which were on the federal endangered species list. The result is a tragic loss for Hawaii's unique ecosystem, with species that are now gone forever due to the mongoose introduction. Interestingly, the Hawaiian government doesn't consider the introduction of mongooses to be a case of biological control because there was no environmental impact assessment done before bringing them in. And Hawaii isn't the only place to regret introducing mongooses without proper research. In 1872, a British colonist brought mongooses to his sugar plantation in Jamaica to tackle a rat problem. But instead of taking care of the rats, the mongooses spread across the island, leading to a sharp decline in local bird and reptile populations. With fewer animals to control insects and other pests, a tick outbreak soon followed, making the situation even worse. When the colonists raised his concerns with British authorities, they dismissed him, insisting that nature would balance itself out. Spoiler, it didn't. This introduction of mongooses ended up causing serious harm to Jamaica's unique ecosystems. Like Hawaii, Jamaica's experience serves as a warning about the risks of introducing non-native species without careful research. And Hawaii and Jamaica aren't the only places impacted by mongooses. Did you know about the St. Croix ground lizard? On 4 small islands in the Caribbean Sea, these lizards dart through fallen leaves, foraging and fighting for survival. Sadly, they were completely wiped out on their original home island, St. Croix, due to 2 major threats: land redevelopment and the introduction of mongooses. On 2 nearby coastal islands, only about 400 lizards survived, managing to escape being eaten. Fortunately, conservationists acted just in time. Conservation efforts kicked off, moving the lizards to safer habitats. Thanks to these efforts, their population has now grown to nearly 3,000, and scientists are hopeful that they can return these resilient lizards to St. Croix, where they belong. Preserving these lizards is crucial for protecting the Caribbean's unique wildlife. But the connection between mongooses and humans goes way back. In fact, there's evidence of it from over 4,000 years ago. A recent study on ancient Egyptian tombs revealed a fascinating drawing showing a person leading what looks like a mongoose on a leash. Both collar and leash are clearly depicted. Although mongooses were never truly domesticated, some cultures kept them as pets, mainly to control pests like snakes, rats and mice in homes and on farms. This drawing gives us a rare peek into how mongooses were valued long ago. Scientists even think this mongoose may have been used to scare off birds to make hunting easier. There's some debate about a second leash in the drawing. Some believe it's attached to a dog, while others think it might be a hornless goat. Either way, this artwork offers a unique glimpse into how ancient Egyptians interacted with animals in their daily lives. Here's an interesting twist on the role of mongooses. In Sri Lanka, where dogs are usually the go-to animals for sniffing out illegal substances, someone had a fresh idea. Why not try mongooses instead? Locals in Sri Lanka have long relied on these animals to keep cobras away from their farms, so it seemed worth a shot to see if they could be trained for this new purpose. A $50,000 grant was awarded for a pilot project, and they even brought in a specialist to get things started. The National Zoo offered its grounds for training, making this an exciting opportunity to see if mongooses could take on a whole new kind of task. The plan was straightforward. Release a few trained mongooses into a cargo container filled with car parts and see if they could sniff out anything illegal. If they found something, they would signal by coming out with their tails all puffed up. Amazingly, the mongooses passed the test with flying colors. They showed they could be trained to detect contraband. But unfortunately, due to shifts in leadership and some political issues, the project was eventually dropped. It's a shame, really. It would have been fantastic to see mongooses working as customs officers. Just picture them in action, sniffing out illegal goods. In the end, dealing with invasive species isn't easy, but Japan's experience shows that it can be done. Let's carry these lessons forward to help protect the natural balance of our ecosystems.